In terms of thinking more broadly about some of the challenges and issues with the evidence base, what we know, and this is not just related to England, that many students today are put off by curriculum that they perceive to be irrelevant. They don't see how it aligns with their aspirations, their employment opportunities, and in some countries, certainly I will include an Evidence England as an example of this. There's a real sense of a high level of prescription within a curriculum that doesn't enable young people to exercise a sense of agency or choice. There are challenges with whether the curriculum is matched to the needs of learners, and certainly here we have turned into something of an exam factory where students are predominantly assessed by repeating or rote learning information that they write in a 3-hour silent exam or not. It also appears that we're moving towards a significant time for change, not just necessitated by the pandemic, but certainly hastened by that, I think. And for quite some time now, internationally, there's been every sense that the 21st century will necessitate different approaches to teaching and learning, really so that young people develop different skills and attributes than previous generations. Certainly, we know that employers are demanding different skill sets, and within this, there's been quite an emphasis on soft skills, social skills, creativity, problem solving, teamwork. And also behind that, a concern that curriculum often lags behind developments, technological developments, and the speed of change within the world. If you could move to the next slide, Ollie, that would be really helpful. What we also know, and this does relate to the situation in which we find ourselves, is that employment opportunities are much, much harder for young people. Some young people are feeling very anxious about their futures. We've seen widening gaps in inequalities in attainment that have been here, certainly in England, for a long time, but have now exacerbated. And we've also seen a rise in the young people who are not in education or training or employment. And these figures relate to England, but you see this level of concern in Australia, in Canada, in a whole variety of countries. So if we move to think about the next slide as we start to look towards this evidence base, some of these international trends that I've been talking about in terms of thinking about different skill sets involved by employers, the multiple careers that young people may have that you and I have never even imagined as yet. There's definitely a shift, I think, internationally across many jurisdictions about thinking about education, and more particularly the idea of 21st century skills or competencies that evidence and support young people to develop critical thinking, problem solving, curiosity, interpersonal and communication skills, self-regulation, entrepreneurial skills, and so on. And what you see in that evidence is that it's out of line really with a very didactic, teacher-centered approach to education. We've known this for many, many decades in higher education, which is why you frequently see constructivist approaches to learning being implemented. And it does appear now that the evidence is gathering for this to inform, school-based, further college-based education in a really meaningful way. What we also know is that young people continue to have very narrow career aspirations that have changed very little over the last 20 years. There's a recent publication by Anthony Mann that sort of sets that out in detail. So lots of questions being asked about what type of curriculum offer, what type of pedagogical approach might be a better fit for young people, given all of the challenges that I've raised, not to mention AI and automation. So there's a agreed evidence base, I would think, that argues for experiential approaches to learning, student-centered approaches to learning. And if we focus in specifically on project-based learning, that clearly fits within this. Evidence in education is often quite tricky to gather, but I'm going to cherry pick a few studies, if we could flick, thank you, Ollie, that demonstrate more hard evidence. Quite often, the idea of randomized controlled trials is seen as the sort of gold standard of evidence, although that isn't always the most appropriate way to investigate educational phenomena. But in terms of the audience today, I thought I would draw on 3 illustrations. So in the UK, the Education Foundation, Endowment Foundation funded a randomized controlled trial that involved 24 schools, over 4,000 students in the north of England. And the evaluation of students took place in lots of sort of active project-based learning, looking at the environmental impact of rubbish, creating fashion pieces from recycled waste, putting on a fashion show. They wrote and produced books. And although there were some issues and challenges with the evaluation in terms of dropout, overall there was clear evidence that PBL enhances the quality of children's learning, and particularly looking at communication skills, teamworking skills, research skills, oracy, and the types of skills that will be needed for future employment. In the US, published earlier this year, another randomized controlled study involving over 3,000 students from mainly urban districts in the US. And this was looking at project-based learning on what's called advanced placement courses. These are courses that students might take in high school, but they're set at a sort of higher level, and credits earned from this can count to university and college graduation. So in the 2 subjects we're looking at, government and politics and environmental science, and students undertook mock presidential elections. They created political action plans, environmental resources for farming. And in the intervention group, certainly the student engaged with the learning and they valued the group work activities, but they were much more likely to earn a qualifying score of 3 or above, which increased their chances of receiving college credit. Where we also have a growing hard evidence base is related to community connecting learning and employer engagement. So research undertaken that's based on the British cohort study, which is a large longitudinal data set involving thousands of individuals, found that for each career talk young people had with somebody outside of school that people had at the age of 14 to 15, they could expect to benefit on average 0.8% wage premium activity when they were 26 and in full-time employment, compared to those who hadn't had those types of experiences. So we have a gathering evidence base that it does need some further work in terms of more randomized control trials. That's absolutely clear, but there is a strong, compelling evidence base of PBL, community connected learning, and authentic activities enabling young people to succeed and flourish. And if we move quickly on, I'm mindful of the time that I've been given. What you do see within PBL are some broad common features. These might vary in different contexts, different subject areas, but it's always around this sort of challenging problem, an issue, something that can engage young people and that they take part in over a sustained amount of time. Absolutely, real world issues are critical through this. And the process within this always involves this sort of active critical reflection, revision, and the creation of some sort of artifact or product. Quite often these are then presented to different audiences, members of the community, who sort of share and celebrate in the sort of activities that young people have done. And quite often, if we look at youth social action, these types of problems will be engaging in genuine community issues and empowering young people to impact on their communities. Certainly from the perspective of young people, next slide please, Ollie, what they do share in common is this very student-centered approach that requires teachers to facilitate and scaffold learning rather than doing or telling the learning to the students. Very active engagement in teams, and quite often teams might designate someone to be a project leader and someone to take notes of the meeting, different responsibilities. And absolutely critical within this is employer engagement, and aligned to that, opportunities for an embedded approach to careers, education, advice and guidance. Internationally, there are real concerns about postcode lottery approaches to careers guidance and advice that's out of sync with current opportunities for young people. And by connecting these different elements in terms of project-based learning, authentic learning experiences, and ensuring that the experiences are connected to the community, will put young people in a much better stead in terms of thinking about their wider life skills and their educational transitions. So if I've got time for one example, Ollie, is that okay? Can I get a little nod there? I've got a thumbs up. Recently, I was very fortunate to undertake some work looking at career colleges in England. And they're a bit of a hybrid. There's like small units within further education colleges. And in this one example, the students, digital health and social care students, were enabled to take part in a project that involved partnership with Amazon Web Services, Samaritans, London Sport, UK Active, and also the Marylebone Cricket Club. And what they were asked to do was to think about and develop an innovative digital solution to promote the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of young people. So something that was very meaningful, very important, and actually related to the real world. And they developed their projects and actually were very fortunate in being able to present this to Amazon Web Services. But the learning from that was from the young people was incredibly impressive, and they've talked about that most eloquently. But what it does demonstrate is enabling young people to have some agency, to follow their aspirations and to be creative, a real engagement with authentic real-world project-based learning, that they're developing creativity, problem solving, and thinking in developing those sort of higher order skills, which are often missing when young people are focused on rote learning and examinations. And also, quite importantly, enabling young people to develop these wider social and emotional skills that are quite critical in explaining education and employment outlines.